America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It is Wednesday, September 4th, 2024. My name is Sam Seder. This is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal, the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, David Sirota, founder, editor-in-chief of The Lever, host of the new investigative podcast, Master Plan. Also on the program today, Harris rolls out more on our economic plan, this time a tax benefit plan for small business. Meanwhile, polls showing Gen Z rallying around Harris Walls. Israel kills nearly 50 during the so-called vaccination pause. Though the UN reports vaccinations are ahead of schedule, this being polio vaccinations in Gaza. Trump now demanding House Republicans force a September 30th government shutdown. See if Mike Johnson responds. House Dems on the Oversight Committee make a formal inquiry asking Donald Trump if he took illegal payments from Egypt. That's based on a Washington Post story from about a month ago. Meanwhile, Judd Legum at his blog, Informed Comment, Popular Information. Donald Trump may have a Willie Horton problem. I'll explain to you all who Willie Horton was during the show. Meanwhile, Bobby Kennedy stuck on the Michigan ballot. John Tester's Montana Senate opponent, Tim Sheehy, caught on tape being racist against Native Americans. Meanwhile, Republicans again sued to stop student loan forgiveness. 9,000 hotel workers remain on strike as Baltimore and Seattle conclude theirs. Russian missiles kill 50. And threat of acute hunger as 26 million on the brink in Sudan. And then the heartwarming tale, Mark Robinson cared enough to visit a video porn shop back in the 90s 5 days a week. All this and more on today's Majority Report. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks so much for joining us. Emma is out today. Also, let me just make a heads up. A lot of folks probably tuning in for the fun half today because I had teased the fact that our former elementary school correspondent, now entering middle school correspondent, was going to be on the program later today to give us a report on all things. You'll recall this guy nailed it when it came to Biden just weeks before Biden dropped out. He's got the sniffles, and we're keeping him home so that he recovers. So Saul Seder will not be on the show today, but we will bring him in shortly.
It's not that Bradley messed up his extensive rider, and he...
things get a little bit testy with him. If we don't have the proper number of watermelon seeds in his watermelon,
tech
stuff like that.
Obstacles.
Yep, exactly. We just got an ask. Hey, I'm our crew. Are you covering the debate next week? We sure are. So we will be doing that. Obviously today, Hump Day, although in a way it's not because the week started late. We will be talking with David Sirota momentarily. First, I mean, this is sort of fascinating. I mean, look, there are, and we will get into, I would imagine, some of the critiques of what Harris is running on, particularly from the perspective of the left. I mean, I think like it's quite clear that Harris has made I want to say she made a pivot to the center, but she really never had to pivot because she did not run in a primary, as it were. And this amid stories that Republicans are now telling reporters off the record secretly that they would be happy with a Trump loss, particularly if the Republicans could maintain the Senate. Especially that way they could keep Harris from doing anything and the party could just move on, because it's getting increasingly difficult, I think, for some of these Republicans. Now, again, just because some Republican leaders don't want Donald Trump to win doesn't mean that he won't. And so I wouldn't get too hyped about that. But in the meantime, here is Fox and Friends. Is this Fox and Friends or no? This is just Fox in general.
Fox and Friends first.
There is a concerted effort at Fox to uncover Kamala Harris's accent. They seem to have a real issue with her accent. Now, those of us who were following this stuff back in 2008 when Barack Obama ran, remember all of this. It is exactly the same stuff. They went through how he would code switch, or how he was just a celebrity, or how it was all this, because they had no idea how to deal with Obama. And, at that time they'd still have people marching around carrying monkeys, stuffed monkeys, and they would say that he was a Kenyan socialist and that he wasn't, false birth certificate. They can't do that this time around, and so they're running out of stuff. And this is what they've come up with. Mediate put this together.
So, David, we want to ask you about this clip of Kamala Harris from yesterday. She's making a speech in Detroit, and it's getting a lot of attention because some people are accusing her of using an accent we've never heard her use before. Listen to this.
You better thank a union member for the 5-day work week. You better thank a union member for sick leave. You better thank a union member for paid leave. You better thank a union member for vacation time.
So she made that exact same speech in Pennsylvania a few hours later and did not sound like that. So what do you think about this? Should we be focusing on it?
You know what? Focus on it to examine or to at least see the fakery. She was in Georgia a week ago, and suddenly she had a Georgia accent. She goes from one to the other.
Pause it for a second. Now, what really sort of like I find interesting is it wasn't a Michigan accent that she was putting on there. She was just like getting into the moment, I guess, and. I mean, it was in Detroit. Like, she wasn't putting on a Michigan accent.
No.
Better.
A week ago, and suddenly she had a Georgia accent. She goes from one to the other. I flew yesterday, Carly. As I crossed each state, heading from New York back to Florida, my accent changed. I'm telling you, I had the Carolina accent. Minutes later, South Carolina.
Good
then
stuff.
I was over Georgia. I mean, come on. I was going all over the place. I turned redneck at one point. I think I got that one in there, too.
David.
There she is in Detroit. She changed her accent when she was there in Detroit.
This is a different
she
one.
was speaking to
different clip from Fox.
Has that similar accent, and so she did the same.
Just her hugging people.
Did the same speech in another town with a different accent. So this is the headline on Politico. It says Harris puts her Biden balancing act on display in Pennsylvania. They were in Pittsburgh, and that's what she has to do here. Try to walk a fine line of separating herself from Joe Biden, but yet being thankful that he endorsed her.
President Kamala Harris.
Yeah.
They could have played the clip, but they showed a print headline. Yeah, you're a video medium, audio visual medium. Let's compare them.
Well, they could compare the accent, but also at one point, if she's going around and able to emulate a Georgia accent in Georgia and a Michigan accent in Detroit, a Pennsylvania accent in Pittsburgh, I think we can start giving up some credit here where credit is due. That is actually pretty amazingly impressive.
She can even do like Pennsatucky versus a Philly accent. Yeah. It's really impressive.
Go ahead.
Herself from Joe Biden, but yet being thankful that he endorsed her.
Well, President Kamala Harris was called out after her campaign event in Detroit yesterday.
Now, pause it for a second. I just want you to know that if you were to meet Dana Perino in the flesh, she would also keep talking like this all the time. That is the way that she speaks when she is at the dinner table. Could you please pass the salt? Go ahead.
President Kamala Harris was called out after her campaign event in Detroit yesterday for speaking with an accent that critics are panning as cringeworthy. Judge for yourself. Watch.
You better thank a union member for the 5-day work week. You better thank a union member for sick leave. You better thank a union member for paid leave. You better thank a union member for vacation time.
I mean, I don't know. The crowd seemed to like it.
Yep.
This happens. You think of like Obama and Hillary Clinton was kind of. Trump doesn't really do this.
No.
His accent is New York, no matter where he goes.
He is who he is. You're right. Indeed. So the former Speaker of the House.
It's all part of their plan to, make it seem like she's a secret Manchurian candidate. Where did we hear that before? Oh, but just in case you think like, oh, that's just the lackeys back at the Home Office. Here's Nepotism Ducey. What's his first name?
Peter
Ducey. Actually, raising this question because getting it deep into the policy. Do you remember they were complaining? You remember they were complaining like she's not answering any questions about policy? Yeah. Well, here they are on that policy beat, Fox News, Nepotism Ducey.
Different topic. Since when does the vice president have what sounds like a Southern accent?
I have no idea what you're talking about.
Well,
I mean, this is...
She was talking about unions in Detroit using one tone of voice.
Is this something that
same you think... line.
Okay, Peter.
That she used the same line in Pittsburgh, and it sounded like she at least had some kind of a Southern drawl.
I mean, do you hear the question that you're... I mean, do you think Americans seriously think that this is an important question? They care... You know what they care about? They care about the economy. They care about lowering costs. They care about health care. That's what Americans care about.
So
that's what they want to hear.
This is something...
They care about, your colleague just asked me about, what basically we talked about, went back and forth about democracy and freedom. That's what they care about. I'm not even going to entertain some question about the president. It's just, hearing it sounds so ridiculous.
Well, but hearing it is...
The question, I'm talking about the questions is just insane.
Is that how she talks in meetings?
I'm just, Peter, we're moving on. We're still moving on. Go ahead, Anita.
Thanks. Pretty amazing. And the best part is they played that on Fox News. Like they thought it was some type of own.
The thing is like people aren't familiar enough with Kamala to know she doesn't speak like that. Like I'm in this business and I don't know that it would definitely stick out to me. No. Maybe she's putting a little bit extra stake.
I don't know if she does or doesn't. Exactly. Frankly, I've never heard her give any like sidewinder speeches in front of unions before.
Exactly. I think it's more just a way to say like, look at the way she's speaking. She's speaking.
Oh
like
yeah,
a black
exactly.
woman.
Yeah, she sounds like it might be black. Might be.
Yeah.
Play this clip. They say that Donald Trump never put on an accent, but I seem to remember one. I just put this in the group chat. I seem to remember.
And we're going to work on.
I seem to remember him doing an accent.
Right, but we're also going to work on military when we defend nations that are very wealthy, and we do it for almost nothing. I say, why are we defending them? We love them. I won't mention names. But there are a lot of them. We love them. They're wealthy. One of them has a cash flow that they say is unsustainable. It's so large. Think of that. How would you like to have an unsustainable cash flow? They don't know what to do with their money. And we defend them. It's going to change.
This
folks.
clip is,
We're
I
gonna
think,
defend
like
them.
68 years
But they're
old.
going to treat us fairly. And they're going to pay for their defense. Does that make sense? And a lot of this was from many, many years ago when we defended a defeated country, and then they became strong and they became rich, and we just kept the same defense. What happened? Why didn't anybody go in and negotiate? And when I was in Asia, I spoke to a couple of the countries about it, and they looked like this. You know what this is? Mm-hmm. That means they know they're getting away with murder, and they got to start helping us out, okay?
I guess we didn't get the accent on that one. But I will say he's dropped off quite a bit. Hasn't
that looks
he?
like a different guy.
That looks like a different guy. All right. I'm going to take a quick break. And, I got a couple of words from our sponsor. And then in a moment, we'll be talking to David Sirota, founder and editor of the Chief of the Lever and host of a new investigative podcast called The Master Plan, which is really interesting, actually. First, word from our sponsor. As you know, I've been doing this now for about 20 years. I do not remember. This is one of those instances where I've been using a product for years and years and years, and they asked us to advertise for it, and I was like, happily. And particularly when you're doing radio in particular, but it's still a significant problem for me now, is that there are people out there who don't appreciate me for various reasons. Some, in my personal life, but I'm talking total strangers who want to look up information about me, and I would rather they didn't know that information. You cannot believe how much of your personal data is out there on the internet for anyone to see. It's a lot more than you think. Your name, contact info, sometimes your social security number, your home address, information about your family members, where you've lived, et cetera, et cetera. They're compiled by data brokers. They are sold online. There's all sorts of services. Over the last decade, U.S. has witnessed steady growth in politically motivated, threatening online behavior, peaking around election cycles. Believe me, that's the case. But also, there are issues that people have with identity theft. Identity thieves find a certain amount of data online, and I should say, through a hack, and then they fill it out with stuff that they can get through these services. Delete Me is a service that will essentially erase you as much as humanly or even beyond humanly possible from the web. You cannot control whether you are a target of identity theft or of, frankly, weirdos out there. But you can make it harder for those people to get your information by taking a proactive approach to the security of your personal info. It is, what is it? What do we call that? OPSEC. I don't know when I started signing up for Delete Me. I feel like it was like 10 years ago. It could have been 10 years. It could have been a little more, actually. And what Delete Me does, it finds and removes any personal information that you don't want online. They give you a choice, like, I don't want my address. I don't want this, this, and this. And it makes sure that it stays off. This is a continuous service. Delete Me is a subscription service, and it removes your information from these large databases. In the process, like I say, it helps prevent doxing, it helps prevent ID theft and phishing scams and whatnot. You sign up, you provide Delete Me with exactly what information you want deleted, and their experts take it from there. Delete Me sends you regular personalized privacy reports showing what info they found, where they found it, what they removed. I just saw, I got like a notice that I got a breach that the Social Security is out there, number is out there on the dark web. And the beauty of Delete Me is that it's going to it's not going to allow people who end up with that information to get my accurate address. Delete Me is not a one-time service. It's constantly working It monitors, it removes personal information you don't want on the internet. Put it simply, Delete Me does all the hard work of wiping you and your family's personal information from data broker websites. Take control of your data. Keep your private life private by signing up for Delete Me. Right now, special discount for our listeners today. Get 20% off your Delete Me plan by texting majority to 64000. That's text the word majority to 64000. That's majority to 64000. Message and data rates may apply. See terms for details. Also, today's program sponsored by Smalls. They have made a major impact on the life of my, as you know, just lost a cat. I don't know, I guess maybe now close to a month ago. But Leo is still around, and, there's not much positives in losing a cat, but now we can feed Leo and not have to worry about his brother stealing all his food. His brother had diabetes. Leo is healthy, but I want to keep him healthy, and that's why you got to try Smalls. It is time to make the kibble thing for your cat a thing of the past. Smalls is cat food. It is protein-packed. Recipes made with preservative-free ingredients you'd find in your fridge. It's delivered right to your door. That's why veterinarians.org rates Smalls 10 out of 10 for ingredient quality. Smalls started back in 2017 by a couple of guys who were cooking cat food in small batches for their friends. A few short years later, they've served millions of meals to cats across the U.S. Comes in a freezer pack box. This is the way I got it anyways. I think you can get it at stores as well. The packaging is actually water soluble. You put the insulation into your sink, and it washes away, completely compostable, which is great. But also they have a bunch of different flavors. Leo is loving the fish flavor. Now, at this point, you may be wondering, why can't I just feed my cat kibble? Well, believe it or not, your cute kitty descended from ferocious desert cats who hunted live prey for food, and your cat isn't any different. They still need fresh, protein-packed meals to be at their best. Other cat food brands know this, but they choose to put their wallets first. How do they do that? They put in fillers. They put in meat byproducts. They put in artificial flavoring. They put in preservatives with names that I would challenge anybody to pronounce. It sounds gross, and your cat, it's not making your cat healthy. I can attest to this. After switching to Smalls, 88% of cat owners reported overall health improvements, and that is a big deal. The team at Smalls is so confident your cat's going to love their product, you can try it risk-free. That means they'll refund you if your cat won't eat their food. Now it's time to make the switch to Smalls. Head to smalls.com/majority. Use the promo code majority at checkout. 50% off your first order plus free shipping. That's the best offer you're going to have to, you will find, but you have to use my code majority. 50% off your first order. One last time, that's promo code majority. 50% off your first order plus free shipping. All right, quick break. We'll be right back with David Sirota. We are back. Sam Seder on the Majority Report. Emma Vigeland out today. Real pleasure to welcome back to the program David Sirota. He is of course, founder, editor-in-chief of The Lever, host of the new investigative podcast, The Master Plan, Academy Award nominee for script writing, reporter many places, a former speechwriter for Bernie Sanders. David, always a pleasure to see you. All right. I know I've asked you this before. Lever or lever?
It depends if you're British. Apparently, if you're British, it's lever. Are you British? I didn't think you were.
But I will pronounce things like I am British, and then like also I'll pronounce things like I'm like English is not my first language. Like
tomato, however you prefer.
As long as the V is in there.
Yeah, exactly.
Your podcast, I just want to start with that, and then I want to talk a little bit about Harris and the campaign and some of those things. I have not listened to the 4th episode, but I was waiting. It literally answered a question that I have had because, I'm getting ahead of myself, but the master plan is about this sort of like broad 40-year, almost 50-year now history that we have. No, more than 50-year history that we have of like this plan essentially by big money, corporate money, and to essentially, more or less take over our government in many respects. And in episode 3, you're talking about the Powell memo, which, we've cited over the years and years. But there's always been some like discrepancy as to whether the Powell memo was sort of like actually the blueprint for this. And then you came out with episode 4. I have not listened to it, but it basically answers that question, which is great. But give us the overview of the podcast first, and then we can get into that.
So the podcast is about specifically the master plan to deregulate the campaign finance laws and get rid of the anti-corruption laws, the bribery statutes in America. The reason that that's a central goal of the corporate forces that executed this master plan is because once they can do that, then they can basically buy everything else, right? If you want to buy unpopular policies that enrich the rich, that enrich corporations and oligarchs, you're not going to necessarily be able to do that through the one person, one vote system. You're going to need to try to find a hack, and money is the hack. And so what we trace is the way that they did this. And it starts in and around Watergate. I think a lot of people forget that Watergate was really the first major campaign finance scandal of the late 20th century. Illegal corporate campaign contributions effectively funded the break-in. They were prosecuted for that. And so it was a time that came out of Watergate, major campaign finance reforms that finally were going to clean up the system. But at the same time that was happening, Lewis Powell had written his memo. And as you will learn in episode 4,
a big corporate attorney.
Yes, right. Corporate attorney, head of the American Bar Association. He writes this memo, and this memo is a detailed blueprint for what needs to be done for corporations to take back power. They were worried about Ralph Nader. They were worried about the democracy reform movement. They were worried about all sorts of things like that. And what we detail in episode 4 is how there was a series of task forces of executives from the top biggest corporations in America, and they went over how they were implementing the specific directives of the Powell memo. And one of the things that they focused on was deregulating campaign finance. So it is not coincidental that soon after Watergate, when Congress passed the post-Watergate campaign finance reforms, there were loopholes put into those reforms, allowing for the creation and explosion of corporate PACs. It is not coincidental that when these task forces were meeting and focused on deregulating campaign finance, soon after came a lawsuit at the Supreme Court, which enshrined what was then a radical idea that money in politics isn't corruption, money in politics is free speech, an idea that was masterminded by John Bolton. Yes, the same John Bolton, who was one of the lawyers in the case. It is not a coincidence that out of this period of time came a decision called Bellotti, which was the decision that then extended free speech rights. Money is speech, constitutionally protected speech. It extended that doctrine to corporations. And as we detail in the episode you haven't listened to yet, Lewis Powell himself works behind the scenes at the Supreme Court to engineer that corporations have free speech rights case. He works behind the scenes to deliver that, and that case becomes the foundation for Citizens United. Now, there's a lot between that and Citizens United, but that's
right. I mean, you have Buckley v. Vallejo, you have Bellotti. These are the sort of like the foundational cases, and we should just remind people, Powell was when you say work behind the scenes at the Supreme Court, he was on the Supreme Court. At that point. Like he gets appointed by Nixon after, within
3 months later, 3 months after the memo. And by the way, here's a fun little detail. We discovered that Powell was a source for J. Edgar Hoover. When Powell writes his memo, it starts circulating among the business elite, but it's not kind of widely known, widely public. It's sort of circulating among the Chamber of Commerce types. He gets nominated by Nixon for the Supreme Court 3 months later. And the FBI traditionally provides a report to senators who evaluate Supreme Court justices. They do a sort of background check. And what do you know? What did not make it into the Senate report from the FBI?
Is it the Powell memo?
That's right. So Lewis Powell is put on the court in a near unanimous vote. Looking back, remember, it's a Democratic Senate.
Right.
Not all that friendly to Richard Nixon. Had the Powell memo been in the Senate report, there's a very good chance that Lewis Powell never would have been on the Supreme Court to create that ruling that gave corporations free speech rights to spend in elections.
That Powell memo was essentially in the same vault at the FBI as where Brett Kavanaugh's, the person who paid off Brett Kavanaugh's debts. In the exact same place. The FBI.
Speaking of Brett Kavanaugh, I'll also give you a little teaser. In a later episode, let's just say there's a lot of emails involving Brett Kavanaugh and the stacking of the courts in the early 2000s. We'll get to that part of the master plan in some later episodes.
Interesting. It's fascinating, and the thing I really love about it is like you're doing. It should be clear. I mean, you're doing a lot of real reporting in this. I mean, that is, this is not, we do a daily podcast here and we don't really do much reporting, as it were. We report on other people's reporting. But this is original reporting you guys are doing. And that's one of the things I love about your outfit. I mean, folks can go check out. I mean, there's great stories there on a daily basis, as well as newsletters. So that's great. I mean, and what's the value of it, though? I mean, from the perspective of progressives. I mean, we were talking about this kind of stuff. I mean, I think you and I probably were talking about broadly speaking, even 20 years ago, what that we were 20 years ago or so, or 25 years ago was when a lot of this stuff started to crest in some way. You had this sort of long-term plan that came out of in response to things like the Voting Rights Act, the Civil Rights Act, Medicare and Medicaid in the mid-'60s, emancipation movements, environmental movement that, and the environmental movement necessarily meant we have to curb essentially corporations from dumping from dumping from offloading, socializing the cost of their profits by dumping, chemicals into the Cuyahoga River or whatever it is. That's what it meant. And that's what was like the impetus for all of those things. This sort of like this arc, that was the impetus, and it basically started to reverse that arc. What's the value of knowing this now, for those of us who want to sort of like push back on it?
I think the value in knowing this is first and foremost that if it was a plan to deregulate campaign finance and legalize bribery and corruption, if that's the central core of how you get everything else, if that's how you get a government that then rescinds the environmental laws to allow the company to dump the chemical in the river, it's important to, one, know how central campaign finance and anti-corruption laws are to everything else. It's also important to know that if it's a plan that did that, then those were specific decisions by specific people. It wasn't just some force of nature. It wasn't some inevitability, right? What we uncover here is the specific plan, specific people, and how they executed it. And I should say, we also talk a lot, we do a lot of reporting on the effort to stop them, because there was an effort to stop them. And the effort to stop them at times was extremely successful. I mean, let's not forget, right after Watergate, they did pass major campaign finance reforms for the first time in, at that point, 50 years. And that was not an easy lift. Now, I grant you, Gerald Ford went to a secret meeting in Disney World, and in a meeting that effectively plotted to put loopholes into that bill. And that bill did have loopholes in it, but it was something real. I would also say this. Let's not forget John McCain in the mid-1990s and early 2000s. John McCain, I think a lot of people don't remember this. John McCain first came to national political prominence through the Keating 5 scandal, which was he was one of the 5 senators who pressured federal bank regulators on behalf of a big donor. And instead of pretending it, wasn't a big deal, instead of resigning, John McCain did something you almost never see. John McCain came to the campaign finance reform cause with the zeal of a convert. He apologized and he got serious about trying to clean up the worst parts of the system. And he ultimately ran for president on that issue. And his staff, as we recount in the series, his staff told him, no one's going to care about this issue. No one cares about corruption. And he said, I care about it, and I think you're wrong. And guess what? He almost won the Republican nomination for president. And as important, he actually forced the human personification of money politics, George W. Bush, to support major campaign finance reform legislation that Bush had to sign and that the Supreme Court actually upheld. Now, you could say, look, the Supreme Court soon after, a couple of years later, repealed it. But I think the point is that it's all a reminder that if we don't accept that the corruption we're immersed in is simply normal, inevitable, natural, unchangeable, then there are plenty of chances to fix some of it, to remove the worst parts of it. But what I worry about, Sam, is that it's kind of like the David Foster Wallace speech about the fish, right? The parable is, 2 fish are swimming along, another fish swims by and says, "Hey, how do you think the water is today?" And the fish say, "What's water?" Right. I fear that that's what's happening with corruption. That we've now decided that big money going into elections, money that comes with the expectation of government favors, this isn't corruption anymore. This is just politics, and that not only have the politicians accepted that, but the public is accepting that. I mean, let's not forget. Bernie Sanders, in his 2020 campaign, at one point, one of his surrogates tried to, wrote an op-ed about Joe Biden's corporate ties and said, Joe Biden may have a corruption problem. Bernie Sanders faced so much criticism for that his surrogate said this, that he felt the need to apologize. Katie Porter, in the 2024 primary, she had the temerity to say, crypto billionaires spent against her. And she said, billionaires spending lots of money in elections can effectively rig elections. She was vilified for saying that. Yeah. And I think the takeaway from that is, wait a minute. Are we now at a stage where corruption is so pervasive and normalized that the people who call it out are the ones being criticized? Because if we're at that point, then we're never going to get to the politics of somebody like John McCain in the late 1990s, where the outrage actually created some reforms.
And we should say, in 2016, getting money out of politics was the thing that launched Sanders. Absolutely. Getting that kind of money out of politics. It is fascinating that the turn that is taken. And McCain, that savings and loans crisis we should also say, like, we saw a redux of it really in 2008 in many respects. It was obviously much larger. But the savings and loan crisis, he overcompensated, which was good, and ended up, like you say, did the McCain-Feingold campaign finance bill. But are we? So we have two different dilemmas, though, in terms of this specific issue, right? One is that it's become normalized because we went through a period, it feels like, over the past 10 to 15 years. And, and I saw this, in the context of Feingold, who lost his race to one of the dumbest people in the Senate right now. I mean, just, it was also a very tough time in Wisconsin over the past couple of decades in terms of politics. But the idea of okay, we can't unilaterally disarm relative to the Republicans, which there's some merit, right? To that. But that being well, if the Republicans are going to have, super PACs, and they're going to have, they're going to spend $1 billion on this race, we got to spend that money too, because it makes a difference. Now, we can get into the specifics about, how money's spent, which a lot of time is sort of a scam. I think you and I both know, there's a whole consultant class that skims money off it and whatnot. But leaving that aside, it's a legitimate argument on some level. You don't want to be, you don't want to, take a knife to a gunfight type of situation. But at the same time, we have this sort of cultural problem where it becomes okay, it's box office numbers. Kamala Harris, has got $1 billion to run in this thing. That's good because she's going to beat Donald Trump. But it's also sort of bad because where's that money coming from?
Right. And look, I'm not saying that Democrats or Republicans should unilaterally disarm in an election system that basically requires these candidates to raise private money that, again, lots of it comes with the expectations of government favors. I think what I'm saying is that if the public becomes so normalized and inured to that we're not also demanding that when Democrats are in power, they pass things like the Disclose Act. They pass things like a bill to allow for a public financing option of elections. If we become if corruption becomes so normalized that those are not the demands, then we're just going to keep getting the best money, the best government that big money can buy. Now, I will credit the Democrats for at least being the ones to co-sponsor the Disclose Act, which would require disclosure of dark money. I will credit the Democrats for at least being willing to co-sponsor public financing of elections legislation. And that stuff is not pie in the sky stuff, right? I mean, the Disclose Act to disclose dark money, I mean, that's written into Citizens United, whereas even the Citizens United decision says the government has the constitutional authority to require at least the disclosure of spending, even if that ruling says the spending can be unlimited. Public financing of elections passed in the Senate. After Watergate, it passed in the late 1980s and early 1990s. Democrats have sponsored that. I mean, states have passed publicly financed elections. Like, this stuff is not crazy pie in the sky stuff.
Right.
But it requires the public to be kind of focused on it, and for there to be leaders in Congress who do, again, I'm not holding up John McCain as like the greatest saint in the world, just a famous example, but leaders in Congress willing to actually stake their brands on that kind of politics.
Yeah. And we should say, the Disclose Act and public financing, as opposed to limiting money, is a function of the court, right? That's the other issue. There's sort of like this culture that we have of we don't want to accept this, because once you accept it, then there's not going to be any impetus. But as you mentioned in the Citizens United case, I think it was Kennedy who said this is not going to be a problem because there's disclosure. And of course, the disclosure comes a week after the election. and frankly, I mean, I think the disclosure is important. I'm not convinced that that's the culture side of it, is that like, oh, okay. I mean, AIPAC put $100 million in, people just don't, that's like,
look, disclosure is not, it's not a panacea, right? It's not curative.
What do we do about this, the court? Like, because this court is not going to, and by this court, I mean, it could be a court, you and I could be well past retirement. Like, I mean, really retired before this court is fundamentally different. Like, what do we do in that sense? I mean, or is that, or is it also important to leverage that in terms of like, broader reforms, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think there are things that can be done within the paradigms that this current court has laid down. Disclosure, public financing of elections would go a long way. I certainly also think that Citizens United and the idea that corporations have a constitutional right, constitutional First Amendment rights that are as strong as the rights for human beings, actual people, that is the fundamentally the central core problem. And you're right, that paradigm is probably not going to change unless the court changes, and unless everyone's willing to wait 30, 40, 50 years, it won't change in that time. So obviously, court expansion or court term limits. Ro Khanna has talked about term limits. This has to be on the table. And I want to add an important point here, because I think what a lot of people haven't really fully understood is that the court is now not operating as a court. It's operating as a super legislature. It is making laws. And I think it's one thing for a legislature, Congress or your state legislature, to like make some laws that are extreme in one way or the other, because at least every 2 or 4 years, we the people have a chance to throw those people out. When you take a court system with lifetime appointees and turn that into a super legislature, then you've got a problem, because you can't vote those people out. And this is why part of the Powell memo is so focused on the courts, because the government was becoming too democratically, small d, democratically responsive. The parts of the government that people could vote in were becoming, passing Medicare, Medicaid, the EPA, the voting rights. They were too accountable. And so the focus on the courts was like, wait a minute, let's get a part of the government that can legislate what we want without the accountability of voters and elections. That's why Powell was focused on it. That's why Mitch McConnell's focused on it. That's why the Federalist Society is focused on it. It's not because they're obsessed with like just this one branch of government, the legal system, the legal movement. It's because they wanted to turn that branch of government into a super legislature. So I think that's helpful for people to think about why the court is such a problem. It's like, imagine if you had a Congress that you elected people and they were there for the rest of your lives without ever having to come back to you and ask you for their vote. Right? We wouldn't tolerate that for the Congress. Why do we tolerate the judicial branch effectively doing that in the way it's done that? And the only way to fix that is to actually fix that problem.
Right. And I think this is becoming more, the theme over the years is sort of this minoritarian rule that they were very, very patient. I mean, in building this essentially.
And can I add one other point? I mean, please. One of the most fascinating things that we've reviewed in this in I think it's episode 7 is, I mean, you and I can remember this, how fast it went from William Rehnquist and Sandra Day O'Connor to John Roberts and Sam Alito. I think people don't fully I think it was a couple of months in 2005. And I think that we don't fully appreciate, even today, how huge a shift that was. And the thing is that as we tell in Master Plan, is that the conservative legal movement was prepared for that moment. They had worked 40 years at that point to be ready for that moment. And when that moment almost didn't happen, because George W. Bush, after Roberts was confirmed, put up Harriet Miers,
right?
A potentially more moderate nominee to replace one of the justices. that conservative legal movement went to war with their own Republican president to say, no, it needs to be somebody like Alito. That happened in like a flash of an eye.
It was really quick. Harriet Miers, we should just say, was counsel to George W. Bush. She was a longtime sort of like friend of the family.
Right. Exactly.
She was really like.
She wasn't some super moderate either, right? But she wasn't a Federalist Society.
But she wasn't Federalist Society. She wasn't like a movement conservative. She, frankly, like I'm not even sure, I don't recall exactly how sort of like her qualifications. But it was one of the things where they were so upset about Souter from George Bush's father. And David Souter ended up being much more moderate, sort of like this sort of like almost like the New England moderate Republican. And when Harriet Miers was put up, the conservative movement really pushed back. And by movement, like, look, people on the street weren't like Harriet Miers is bad. Republican voters.
Talking about the conservative legal movement.
Legal movement.
Yeah.
The Federalist Society was like
and by the way, do you know what drives me crazy?
Crossed the threshold of its strength, and that's where we got Alito. Alito was the replacement for Harriet Miers.
What drives me crazy? It's like nails on a chalkboard. Where I hear today David Frum, complaining about the end of democracy and the Supreme Court is going to ruin democracy. David Frum ran the campaign to stop Harriet Miers from being the nominee and to make sure it was somebody like Alito. I mean, he's literally, and we have the tape, we play the tape in Master Plan, but like, what's incredible to me, I mean, I guess it's not incredible because apparently everyone has the conservatives have a goldfish memory of, they forget their entire world.
Well, everybody does.
Minutes. Yeah, I guess everybody does. But like to hear David, the crisis of democracy, the court is out of, just like, dude, you were the one who got Alito onto that court.
Listen, I cannot listen to a single one of those, whatever the Lincoln Project or any of the Never Trumpers. I'm like, thank you for your service. Now, please go away.
Yes, like arsonists who are now, decrying the fire.
Right. Where's the fire department? No, absolutely. In fact, I'm not even going to go. I had an argument with a relative on vacation where they're like, did you hear about this? Trump is longtime Republicans. Trump is, he has total immunity as president because the Supreme Court, the three people he appointed, and I'm like, there were 6 judges on there. The other 3 were from Republican presidents that you voted for. So please give me a break. It's there's no, but yes, I'm with you on that. It's
and this whole idea, that one last thing on this, I certainly think I buy into the idea that what John Roberts' long game. I think people, John Roberts is a moderate. He seems like super. I think John Roberts is the puppet master here, where the court will make a big thing about taking like wildly, like insane, even more insanely extreme cases, and then rejecting them, like voting them down, to then make the other insane cases that they're voting through seem like normal. Like, hey, 100%. We rejected this, like, and I think Roberts is the puppet master in all of this.
People forget that Roberts, Kavanaugh, and I think Amy Coney Barrett were part of the Brooks Brothers riot, essentially.
Yes.
They were there working for Reagan in one capacity or another. Not Reagan. I think Roberts was in Reagan.
Yeah, Roberts was Reagan.
But they were working for Bush. They were just part of the sort of like in the Federalist Society thing, and they were there to basically
help steal the Florida election.
Yeah, midwife the theft of that election, as far as I'm concerned. But all right, let's move.
One last nugget. Anthony Kennedy, the guy who wrote Citizens United, I bet you didn't know that he got his career start as a longtime corporate lobbyist, handing out campaign cash in the California legislature.
That I did not know.
Yeah, kind of an important link there, huh?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think, and he was the one, incidentally, in Citizens United, I think I just mentioned that, like, it'll be fine because we're going to be able to see it, and and what was it? There's going to be no appearance of bribery, but the all right, let's turn to the. I'm sure you're aware there's an election coming up in 9 weeks.
Yes.
In fact, it's 62 days, I think, as of yesterday. Yes. I calculated 63 days as 6 weeks, but I've been corrected with some basic math. Your sense of there's been a lot happening. We haven't spoken since we have a new candidate. Where are you on where Harris is at this point? Because it definitely feels to me like there has been there's been this sort of race to the center in some way. But, we were talking just beforehand, fracking. We're just talking about the best thing that Biden did, as far as I'm concerned, probably during his administration, was to freeze permits on these LNG export facilities. That moratorium was enjoined by a court with a Trump appointee judge. No surprise. The Energy Department is appealing that court's ruling to overturn the moratorium. But the Energy Department just granted a 5-year license yesterday to New Fortress Energy. 5 years doesn't allow for as long of a long-term investment in this, but it is not a good sign. What's your perspective on this race at this point?
I think that Kamala Harris is obviously trying to run on vibes. It's kind of a cliche, but I think there's something to the idea of essentially, if it's a short run, that you just try to run on, I'm not Trump, I'm not Biden, in the sense of I'm not old, I can actually do the job. And so I think they're clearly trying to be somewhat vague. And by the way, I think part of their takeaway from Project 2025, I don't think it's the right takeaway, is that the political problem of Project 2025 is that it's 900 pages of detailed policies, when in fact I think the real problem of Project 2025 is that it's an extremist document. In other words, I think they're taking away the idea that any policies put out there creates political vulnerabilities. So as Project 2025 seems to prove with Trump, but I think the takeaway is no, put out some basic policies that aren't extremist, that are popular. And what I worry about, Sam, with Kamala Harris, and I've said this before, I'll say it again, is that I think, in a sense, her political reflexes are actually decent. That we have a historical record of her articulating compelling positions initially from the heart. I think back to Medicare for All in 2019. She offered at that CNN town hall when she was running for president one of the most articulate cases for Medicare for All I'd ever heard. Arguably more articulate than Bernie Sanders. She talked about insurance, et cetera, et cetera. I think the problem is that what she then has tended to do on a lot of issues is kind of then spend a long time backtracking the minute there is pushback. You saw that with the price gouging proposal. Her campaign was going to put out this anti-price gouging thing. A lot of corporations, a lot of the elite media didn't like it. Yep. She sort of dialed back the rhetoric, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that what oftentimes we're looking for in presidential candidate, or what the campaign tests, is not whether you can put out a positive vision with specific policies. It's whether you can handle the heat that comes with it. Can you manage the attacks that will come in, the efforts to scandalize what you're pushing? And that's where I worry about Kamala Harris. And I think Donald Trump understands that. That's why he, in part, is trying to throw everything in the kitchen sink at Harris, hoping that she's going to essentially fumble all of this, right? I mean, that's what the campaign actually tests. Can you handle the heat? So what I think the Democratic convention, I think Harris built up a lot of momentum. It was impressive in the sense of the choreography of it, the her becoming the nominee, et cetera, like politically impressive. I mean, I got some problems with the fact that, from a small d democracy perspective, there weren't votes cast or whatever, but political choreography, it was, I think, effective. But now is where things can move around a lot. Like on this debate stage next week, Donald Trump definitely has thought of like 5 or 10 different ways to attack her in a way that gets her to look like she can't handle the heat, that she's going to backtrack.
Kamala, I'm going to call her Kamala. I'm going to
Kamala.
I'm going to say like, I smell curry. What's that? What is going on here? Like, but all right. So wait, so is your analysis, is the analysis that you're making in terms of like, and I think you're right. She has done just about everything you can do to try and make sure that this is as much a referendum on Donald Trump as anything, as opposed to, which I think is probably a good strategy. And certainly the fact that like, Joe Biden's favorability ratings are up now that he's out of the race, that the day that she comes in, the polls all radically sort of like shift. I mean, not, by no means is would I bet my kids' college education on it, but the polls shift just by virtue of there not being a deficit on the Democratic ticket or a perceived deficit. So their strategy is like, don't do anything that's going to draw too much attention to us. Is your assessment, are you worried about that as a political matter in terms of like the election? Or do you worry about that as a matter of if she wins, what are we going to get after that?
Well, I think it's both. I think it's that if you're not campaigning on much of anything, your opponent can try to make that an issue, right? That answer in her first interview with Dana Bash on CNN, where Dana Bash was like, what do you want to do on day one? And she really didn't have much of an answer. I mean, I don't think it was catastrophic yet, but Ted Kennedy, when he was trying to run a primary against Jimmy Carter, what effectively killed his campaign was he was asked a similar question. Why do you want to be president? And he wasn't able to articulate much of an answer. Now, again, maybe you can get away with that for 60 days, right? Like maybe you can. Right. And who am I to say, you can't? But there is a danger in being so focused on campaigning on nothing and making it a referendum on your opponent that it starts to become a referendum on whether you have any agenda at all. I also definitely worry about the what I would call the Jimmy Carter dynamic. There's a fascinating podcast called Blowback by a reporter named Ben Bradford, who traces how in 1976 Jimmy Carter ran for president, aggressively trying to not define much of a policy platform at all. I mean, it was like the original Vibes campaign. And he eked out an election against Gerald Ford. I mean, he barely won, but he won. But part of the problem was that in campaigning on basically not very much, it created a mandate for an incredibly directionless administration, right, which then 4 years later, that directionlessness created an opportunity for somebody who was campaigning on a very clear agenda, Ronald Reagan. And what I worry about longer term, and I know some people are going to be saying, just focus on winning the election. And I get it, just focus on winning this election right now. But what I worry about like a little longer term is that a Republican Party without Trump removes the glue that keeps the Democrats together, right? Trump is a gift, in a sense, to the Democratic Party in that they can organize around being against him. He loses, Kamala wins with sort of not really a clear mandate about what she's going to do, what she wants to do. And then a Republican Party without Trump 4 years later sends up people like a Josh Hawley or somebody of that ilk who seems like who is an ideologue, who is potentially more appealing than Donald Trump. And we have a redux of the 76 to 1980 situation. Again, I know people say, well, that, just worry about that in, later on. Let's just focus on this election. But 4 years from now, that's what I would worry about.
Yeah, that's an interesting dilemma. I mean, you could argue that sort of the organizing principle of the Biden administration, and let's put aside foreign policy for a moment, because I think I think you also have similar real problems with what's going on with our support of Israel.
Yeah.
But you could argue that from a Biden perspective, like, you know, the labor and antitrust and the sort of like the industrial policy, there's an organizing principle to the Biden administration. Now, I'm not sure he necessarily ran on that. It was a very weird era, period. But he also, I think people thought we were getting something that was frankly more conservative than that. Because he had a 50-year history in the Senate. Harris had a very short period of time in the Senate. She did, I don't know what her like sort of core brand proposition was as vice president. She wasn't running. She wasn't, I don't know if many vice presidents actually have like, this is what they're known for. I don't know. David Dayen described it to me 3 or 4 weeks ago as, Harris is a jump ball. If that's the case, if it is not, if this sort of like, and, she does seem, she's nibbling at the edges of the antitrust stuff. Like, the small business could arguably be, grant that she's coming out with today. The tax incentive is at least sort of like an anti-corporate, more sort of like competition focused type of thing, but that can be interpreted in a couple of different ways. The labor stuff still seems to be sort of something that she's pursuing.
My hope here's my hope. My hope is that Donald Trump loses, that in a Harris administration, that they pick a couple of really big, easy to understand, simple things that are wildly popular. Tim Walz, right before he was put on the ticket, was asked by the New York Times Ezra Klein, what's your top priority? What do you think the Democrats should do if they win in 2024? And he said, paid family and medical leave. That's something that everybody in the country can understand. It's wildly popular among voters of both parties. It's not we've never tried it before. Various states have versions of this. The point is, pick a couple of things like that you can hold up as, first of all, cudgels against the Republicans in the Senate and the House, where you can shame them. You can use it as a political tool to prove which side they're on, and potentially get it passed. And when you get it passed, it's something that's very easy for everyone to understand what it is, right? I mean, I think the Democrats in recent times have done a lot of things.
And an issue like that becomes an avatar for like a broader caring economy. And you can build off of that.
Yes, and I think the part of the thing that's happened to Democrats that's been a problem for them in the last 10, 15, 20 years is their accomplishments are not simple to understand. Okay, like the Affordable Care Act, you're like, well, that's like, but my health care is still going up, and what actually is the ACA? And the pre-existing condition things are good, and there's some good stuff in there, but it's kind of vague, right? Like even the American Rescue Plan, which I think is one of the best things Biden did. It's like, well, it did some unemployment stuff, but then it expired. And the antitrust stuff, super important. The Consumer Financial Protection Bureau stuff, super important. But it's also you got to be kind of paying attention to it, right? Like, hey, I just got paid family and medical leave because the president and the White House did something. Like, everyone can understand that. I think the Democrats sort of fetishizing complexity, and whether it's means testing or whether it's sort of these things that are so complex the average person can't understand it. So my advice to Kamala Harris, not that she's asking, would be pick a couple of things that are super simple, super necessary, super popular, and easy for everyone to understand.
Yeah, I agree with that. Where do you think we are relative? I mean, again, you and I have been having these conversations for, literally 20 years. But where do you think we are with this Democratic Party relative to where we were in like 2004, 2005?
Oh, I mean, look, I think Joe Biden has, I think, really one special skill. It's not even really such an amazing skill, but it's an important skill, which is knowing where the center of the Democratic Party is and positioning himself there. And so I want to go back to what you said earlier about how, Biden did all that, he did the American Rescue Plan, the antitrust stuff, the pro-labor stuff, the CFPB regulatory stuff.
The IRA.
Right, again, right? Yeah, exactly. The IRA. Okay, that was kind of a surprise. And I agree, because we looked at Joe Biden, we looked at what he'd done for 40, 50 years, and we presumed that what Joe Biden did for 40 or 50 years was because Joe Biden was a conservative corporate Democrat. And I think there's some truth to that in those periods of time. And it's not to say Joe Biden was perfect as president, but it is to say that the analysis actually is probably that Joe Biden had those corporate politics in the past, as much because of his own ideology as because that's where the center of the party was. And so what explains why he, on economic policy, has been so much better than the Obama administration and President Obama and what they proposed is because the center of the party actually has moved. And that is because of a whole lot of organizing, a whole lot of pressure, a whole lot of awareness that, for instance, what happened after when hope and change became more of the same after the financial crisis, that was unacceptable. And so I don't necessarily believe in this permanent ratchet effect, like the Democrats are always moving right and the Republicans are moving farther right and the whole set. I think, if you look from where Bill Clinton was, Mr. Welfare Reform, Mr. The era of big government is over, through Obama, we're going to bail out the banks and let 10 million people get foreclosed on, to where Joe Biden was with his economic policy. That's not a ratchet effect trajectory. That's actually the hard work of changing the party actually has paid off. Now, I think the huge question policy-wise for if Harris wins is, does she go back to basically Obamaism, or does she stick with this sort of where Biden is, or Biden was
trajectory,
the Biden trajectory, right? That's a different trajectory. And I think if that trajectory gets another 4 years or 8 years, it's not a perfect fix. It's not a panacea. It doesn't mean everything's solved, but that's better than going back to Obamaism. That's better than going back to the era of big government is over Clintonism.
100%. And I think that's why fights over Lena Khan at this point, which seem sort of small, are much bigger, I think,
huge,
than
because they're signals. They're signals of where she and they want to go.
And it's basically our opportunity, and I'm not exactly sure who the "our" is in that phrase, frankly, but to say there are certain areas where if you tread, you're going to get blowback, and we're going to make it costly for you in terms of your resources, your and you don't want it to. I mean, and that's the way I think, it doesn't work with all the issues, certainly, but it works with some, I think. And, I don't know. I'm always recall 3 million comments was what it took to make Barack Obama's, his FCC chair, who was a former Verizon executive. I can't remember the exact details. Basically say, okay, fine, net neutrality. And, it's 1% of people sending in just email comment, and it turned that around. Was, I think, very instructive to me. But
well, I mean, it goes back to the old idea that I'm going to butcher the phrase, but it's never underestimate how much a relatively small but motivated group of people can accomplish. I mean, small meaning it's still millions of people. But by the way, to bring it all the way back to master plan, they fundamentally understood that principle too. Yep. That over a long enough period of time, a relatively small group of people can change the entire trajectory of the world. And I think that has happened at some level in the Democratic Party to make people like Joe Biden, right, Mr. Corporate Democrat from 20 years ago, be the guy who put Lena Khan in, made an aggressive CFPB, has the best labor policy in at least 40, 50 years. I mean, that didn't happen because Joe Biden woke up one day and was like, I'm going to be a nice guy now, right? That happened because he was a career politician who always knew where the center of the party was. So I think people listening to this, it's not to say oh, I hope Kamala Harris wakes up in the morning and is going to be a nice person. No, it's that the work of holding her to where the new center of the party is an ongoing amount of work. It's all sorts of that pressure, elections, organizing, et cetera, et cetera. That work, sometimes it doesn't feel like it's like a direct one-to-one payoff, but clearly if you like zoom out a little bit, right, that trajectory change from Obama to Biden, that is huge. It's huge.
All right, lastly, but the one thing, and I wonder what replaces this. Biden could look at the center of the party, and he's not like looking at the center of the party by like I'm gonna watch Democracy Now and Morning Joe, and I'll go somewhere in the middle or something to that effect. He's looking at like, okay, Bernie Sanders commanded this many votes, Elizabeth Warren commanded this many votes. The rest of the field couldn't even get to I see what's going on here. And that's the way that he made that assessment. I that's what I imagine. Right. I mean, they felt the threat of Bernie Sanders. I mean, Obama had to swoop in and basically cut deals with everybody and try and bring the party together. And they didn't want Biden. I don't think they wanted Biden, but Biden was the only one who could do it as far as they could see in terms of being that sort of a candidate, the anybody but Bernie candidate. And what replicates that in the absence of a primary that indicates this? I mean, what becomes the evidence for that?
It's a great question. And the other concern I have with Democratic Party culture right now is that especially with Trump, is that the Democratic parties, I'm talking about the sort of activist culture, the culture of rank and file voters, is unify behind the dear leader. Never question. That questioning, that pressuring is the president is bad and dangerous and disloyal. I think Trump, him being the Republican Party leader, has helped suppress that dissent. But I think after Trump is gone, knock on wood, fingers crossed, after the election, he's gone as a force. I think that it will be, the question is whether that culture will change and whether the constituencies of the Democratic Party are willing to continue to make demands on the new administration. And look, yes, there'll be a political calculus from a Harris administration. Do we agree to those demands, or do we go back to the politics of punching left? I mean, I think that's what we've been circling around. Obama's political calculus was, I create quote unquote centrist branding and centrist credibility by periodically punching left.
Yep.
I think Biden has, in a sense, not really done that. I mean, and I think the question for Harris, sort of political branding wise, is, does she see Biden's formula as the way to do, build the coalition? Even when I don't agree with the coalition, I don't put my finger in the eye of the base of the Democratic Party, or does she revert back to the kind of triangulating politics of Clinton and Obama? And I'll just leave you with this. I think if Joe Biden, one of the ultimate triangulators of the 1990s and 2000s politics, if even Mr. Triangulator can come to a different political equation, then so too can someone like Kamala Harris.
Yep. David Sirota, founder, editor-in-chief of The Lever, or The Lever for you Americans, host of the new investigative podcast, Meister Plan, or Master Plan, as we call it. We'll put a link to the podcast. It's really fascinating stuff. I'm glad you guys are doing this. And of course, we'll link to the Lever, which is a daily read for me. David, thanks so much for coming on.
Thanks so much. Really great to see you. Thanks, Ian.
All right, folks, we're going to take a quick break. We'll head into the fun half of the program, wherein we will, I'm always hesitant to promise taking many calls because these days, so much news that we end up blowing through them and people get upset because I've overpromised. But we will take your phone calls, we'll take your IMs, and we will do some clips. Just a reminder, it's your support that makes this show possible. You can become a member at jointhemajorityreport.com. When you do, you not only get the free show free of commercials, you also get the fun half, and you get the I Am the Fun half. We have a newly minted member today. His name is Saul Seder. He couldn't make it in, so I gave him a free membership to the a complimentary to the fun half. He may I Am in now through the app if he figures it out. We'll see if he does. So Saul, if you're listening now, you know what to do. Also, don't forget justcoffee.coop, fair trade coffee and hot chocolate. You can get the Majority Report blend, but you can all get a bunch of other blends. Hit shop. So show all the different coffees that you get up there. This is a great company and just a great bunch of different coffees. Nope. Yeah, there you go. Got all sorts of different blends. And also single origin coffees. Check it out. Justcoffee.coop because it's a co-op. Emma is not here, but ESPN, Bradley.
Yeah, we will be back Thursday afternoon at 4 p.m. ahead of the first NFL game of the 2024 season. We are very excited. We will give a little preview and some of our predictions for the season, as well as our first 3 picks against the spread as we start our challenge, our picks challenge against Emma and I against each other. So youtube.com/ESPN show for that on Thursday at 4 p.m. And you can also go to that and check out our prior streams and clips.
Yeah, and last night on Left Reckoning, Jose Luis and Kurt from Soberania, the Mexican Politics podcast, joined David and I to talk about all of this. You talk about the judiciary in America being maybe in place until you retire, Sam. Mexico is doing something about their judiciary, and the American press is afraid that it's anti-democratic. So we talked to some Mexican journalists about how that is a bunch of BS. Patreon.com/Left Reckoning to get access to that.
See you in the fun half.
You are in for it.
All right, folks. 646-257-3920. See you in the fun half.
Oh, no.
Are you ready?
Who sent us this?
Alpha males are back. Boy is back. And the alpha males are back.
Just as delicious as you could imagine.
The alpha males are back. Boy is back. And the alpha males are back.
Just wanna degrade the white man.
Alpha males are back.
I take all of it in my throat.
Alpha males are back.
Snowflake says what?
The alpha males are back.
You are a madman!
And the alpha males are back.
Oh no, Sam Seder! What a fucking nightmare!
Bring back DJ.
Yeah, or a couple of them. Just put them in rotation.
DJ Denner.
Well, the problem with those is they're like 45 seconds long, so I don't know if they're enough of a break.
That's fucking nonsense. See white people doing drugs, they look worse than normal white people, and all white people look disgusting.
And the alpha males,
psych, fuck them.
Snowflake says what? Snowflake says what?
A hell of a lot of bank. A hell of a lot of bank. A hell of a lot of bank. Okay, I'm making stupid money. Hell of a lot of bank.